Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to share something a little different, something that's been on my mind for a while now. I was going through old family photographs last winter when I finally understood why my mother never smiled in a single picture. My name is Christine Moreau. I'm 77 years old, and it took me almost my entire life to piece together the truth my mother carried alone for 50 years. Growing up, I always noticed something strange about our family photos. My father would be grinning. My older brother would be making faces. I'd be showing my missing front teeth, but my mother always had the same expression. Not quite frowning, but not smiling either. Just this neutral, almost blank look, like she was somewhere else entirely, even though her body was right there in the frame. When I was young, maybe 8 or 9, I asked her about it once. We were looking through a photo album together, and I pointed to a picture from a family vacation at the lake. Everyone looked happy except her. I said, "Mama, why don't you ever smile in pictures?" She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something I didn't understand at the time. She said, "Some things are easier to hide when you're not smiling." Then she changed the subject, and we never talked about it again. My mother's name was Isabel. She was born in 1925 in a small town in rural Quebec, the youngest of 7 children in a French-Canadian family. She met my father in 1947 at a church social. He was handsome and charming, 9 years older than her, a veteran who'd served overseas during the war. They were married 6 months later. She was 22. He was 31. They moved to Montreal, where my father got work at a manufacturing plant. My brother Jean was born in 1949. I came along in 1952. We lived in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood, and from the outside, we looked like any other family of that era. Father worked, mother kept house, children went to school. Everything seemed normal. But it wasn't normal. I know that now. I've known it for a long time, actually. But I didn't want to see it clearly until recently. My father had a temper. That's how we talked about it back then, as if it were just a personality trait, like being tall or having brown eyes. He had a temper. What that really meant was that he was violent when he drank, which was often, and controlling even when he was sober. I have memories from childhood that I tried for years to reinterpret or minimize. The sound of my mother crying in the bathroom after dinner. The bruises on her arms that she said came from being clumsy. The way she walked on eggshells around my father, always watching his mood, always trying to keep everything calm and pleasant so he wouldn't get angry. The times he'd grab her roughly or shove her against a wall when he thought my brother and I weren't looking. But we were looking. Children always see more than adults think they do. We just don't have the words to name what we're seeing, and we don't have the power to stop it. So we adapt. We learn to be quiet when father's in a bad mood. We learn to stay in our rooms. We learn to pretend everything is fine, because that's what mother needs us to do. My mother never talked about what was happening. Not to me, not to my brother, not to anyone as far as I know. In the 1950s and 60s, you didn't talk about these things. There were no domestic violence hotlines, no shelters, no real legal recourse. A man's home was his castle, and what happened between a husband and wife was private. Women were expected to endure, to make the marriage work no matter what, to keep the family together. Leaving wasn't really an option, especially with no money and no job skills and 2 children to support. So my mother stayed. She cooked and cleaned and raised my brother and me. She went to Mass every Sunday. She smiled and chatted with the neighbors. She maintained the appearance of a normal, happy family. And in every single photograph, you can see the cost of that performance in her face. The smile that never quite reached her eyes. The tension in her jaw. The distance in her gaze, like she was somewhere far away. I left home at 18 to attend nursing school. I was desperate to get away, though I didn't admit that to myself at the time. I told myself I was pursuing my education, building my future. But really, I was escaping. I was getting out of that apartment where I'd spent my childhood walking on eggshells, where the air always felt thick with tension and unspoken fear. My brother left too, as soon as he could. He moved to Toronto for work and rarely came back to visit. We both felt guilty about leaving our mother there with him, but we also felt powerless to help her. She wouldn't leave. She wouldn't even acknowledge that anything was wrong. So we convinced ourselves that maybe it wasn't as bad as we remembered, that maybe we were exaggerating, that maybe she was okay. I got married in 1974 to a kind man named Paul, and we had 2 daughters. I became the kind of mother I wished I'd had, warm and affectionate and present. I smiled in every photograph with my children because I wanted them to have proof that they were loved, that their childhood was happy, that their mother chose to be there with them fully. My father died in 1989 of liver failure, a consequence of decades of drinking. He was 70 years old. I went back to Montreal for the funeral, and I remember standing at the cemetery watching my mother's face. I expected to see grief, or at least some emotion, but she just looked tired, deeply, profoundly tired. After the funeral, I stayed with her for a few days to help sort through my father's things. One evening, we were sitting in her kitchen having tea, and she said something that startled me. She said, "I can breathe now." That was all. Just those 4 words. I can breathe now. And I understood that she'd spent 42 years of marriage holding her breath, waiting for it to be over. I thought maybe she'd open up to me then, maybe talk about what those years had really been like. But she didn't. She still maintained the same careful silence she'd kept my whole life. The only difference was that now she was alone, and some of the tension had left her shoulders. She seemed lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying something impossibly heavy and had finally been allowed to set it down. My mother lived another 23 years after my father died. She never remarried, never even dated as far as I know. She seemed content with her quiet life, her garden, her church activities, her grandchildren. She would visit us in Ottawa, and my daughters loved her. She was gentle and patient with them in a way I don't remember her being with me when I was young, as if she'd finally been freed to be the person she actually was underneath all those years of survival. But she still never talked about my father or their marriage. If I tried to bring it up, she'd change the subject or find a reason to leave the room. It was as if those 42 years were locked away in a part of her she couldn't or wouldn't access. And I stopped trying to make her talk about it. I told myself I was respecting her boundaries, but maybe I was just afraid of what she might say if she finally told the truth. She died in 2012 at the age of 87. It was peaceful, in her sleep, the kind of death everyone hopes for. After the funeral, my brother and I went through her apartment to sort out her belongings. In the back of her closet, in a box of old papers and documents, we found something unexpected. A journal. It wasn't a regular diary with daily entries. It was more like scattered thoughts written over many years on whatever paper was available. Some entries were on the backs of envelopes. Some were on pages torn from notebooks. Some were written on church bulletins or grocery lists. The dates ranged from 1955 to 1988, the year before my father died. I sat on my mother's bedroom floor and read every single entry, and with each one, the mother I thought I knew became someone more complex and more heartbreaking. She'd been documenting her life, her real life, the one she could never speak about out loud. The fear, the pain, the calculations she made every day about how to keep the peace, how to protect my brother and me, how to survive. One entry from 1963 said, "He pushed me so hard today, I hit my head on the kitchen counter. I saw stars. John and Christine were at school, thank God. I told them I fell when I was cleaning. They believe me because they want to. Children need to believe their home is safe." Another from 1971 said, "Christine leaves for nursing school next week. I am so proud of her and so relieved. She will have a different life than mine. She will have choices." That is all I ever wanted for her. Another from 1975 said, I went to my grandson's christening today. Paul treats Christine with such gentleness. I watch him with her and I think, this is what it should be like. This is what I should have had. But then I think if I had left, if I had been strong enough to go, Christine might not exist. And I cannot imagine a world without her. So maybe it was worth it. Maybe my suffering bought her life. I tell myself that on the hard days. But it was an entry from 1968 that finally explained the photographs. She wrote, I avoid smiling in pictures because when I smile, it feels like lying. When I smile, I am pretending everything is fine, and everything is not fine, and has not been fine for 20 years. If I smile in a photograph, that photograph becomes evidence of a happiness that does not exist. So I give nothing. I stand there. I let them take the picture, but I do not pretend. The photographs will be proof of the truth I cannot speak. Someday, someone will look at these pictures and wonder why I never smiled. And maybe they will understand that I was telling them something without words. I sat on that bedroom floor, holding that piece of paper, and I cried harder than I'd cried at her funeral, because I finally understood. All those photographs I'd looked at my whole life, wondering why she seemed so distant, so removed. She was trying to tell us. She was documenting her reality the only way she could. She was leaving evidence. My mother couldn't speak her truth out loud because the world she lived in didn't allow it. She couldn't leave because she had no resources and no support. She couldn't protect herself because the law didn't protect women like her. So she did the only thing she could do. She refused to smile. She refused to participate in the fiction that her life was happy. And she wrote down the truth in fragments, on scraps of paper, in case anyone ever needed to know what really happened. I'm 77 years old now, the same age my mother was when I asked her once, tentatively, if she'd had a happy life. She'd said yes, but I knew she was lying. I thought maybe she was lying to protect me, or to protect herself from having to relive painful memories. Now I know she was lying, because that's what she'd been doing for so long that she didn't know how to stop. I have all those photographs now, the ones from my childhood and my parents' marriage. I used to avoid looking at them because they made me uncomfortable. But now I look at them differently. I see my mother standing there, year after year, refusing to smile, and I understand that she was braver than I ever gave her credit for. She was bearing witness to her own life in the only way available to her. I think about what my life might have been like if I'd been born in her generation instead of mine. If I'd married at 22 with no education and no prospects. If I'd had children immediately. If I'd been trapped in a marriage with no way out. Would I have been as strong as she was? Would I have survived it the way she did? I don't know. I hope I never have to find out. But I'm grateful that I had choices she didn't have. I'm grateful that when I had daughters, I could teach them that they didn't have to endure what their grandmother endured, that they could leave, that they could speak up, that their happiness mattered. My daughters know about their grandmother now. I showed them the journal entries, the photographs, all of it. I wanted them to understand where they came from, what their grandmother survived, why it matters that they have options she never had. And I wanted them to look at those old photographs and see what I finally see. Not a woman who was cold or distant or unhappy by nature, but a woman who was telling the truth in the only way she knew how. If you have old family photographs, I want you to look at them again. Look at the faces, especially the women's faces. Look for the ones who aren't smiling. Ask yourself what they might have been trying to tell you, what truth they might have been preserving in their silence and their stillness. And if you're living through something now that you can't speak about, if you're enduring something you think you have to hide, I want you to know that you don't. The world has changed. There are resources now. There are people who will believe you and help you. You don't have to smile in the photographs of a life that's hurting you. You don't have to pretend. My mother never got to leave. She never got to speak her truth out loud, but she left evidence. She left her story for me to find. And now I'm telling it because she deserves to be known for who she really was. Not the silent, somber woman in the photographs, but the brave, enduring person who survived 42 years of something unspeakable and still managed to raise children who knew they were loved. I finally understand why my mother never smiled in photos. She was telling the truth. And the truth was that there was nothing to smile about. But she survived. She endured. And she made sure that her daughter and her granddaughters would have different stories to tell. That's her legacy. And it's enough.